So we're gonna call this place the building, or I'm gonna call it the building for the rest of this talk. And what I guess makes the building so unique in a way that I can definitively say I've never been to this place physically in my waking hours is that it's kind of a structure that does not seem to have an ending, and it doesn't really feel like I ever stop discovering parts of this building. So this all started probably from what I can remember, and I've written down at different points and whatnot. This all started about 20 years ago. I was in high school, and the first dream I remember taking place in the building was this very short dream that I dreamt a couple times, where I would walk into the building, and it was a bit like, the front room was a bit like what you would see, like a large office building or perhaps a hotel. So you would walk through the doors, these big double doors, and when I looked up, I could see several different levels, and each level had an area that was almost like a balcony, in that you could come out to about the middle of that floor, and there would be railing and a drop, and you could see down to the other levels, especially the bottom floor. So you could look over onto the lower levels, and each level had rooms. It looked like, especially the upper levels. The lower levels, they may have had hallways or whatnot, but what I noticed the most, and what kind of caught my eye with those first couple dreams, was that if you looked at the uppermost levels, I couldn't tell you how many of them there were, at least 5, 6, 7, 8 levels. They all, again, kind of looked like a hotel. They would all have these rooms. And there was this conscious thought in my head that people lived in these rooms. And possibly people who had previously been homeless. I don't know exactly what that means, but so it was like an apartment building in that way. A huge apartment building. So anyway, that was the first part of the building that I dreamt about. And from then on, every time I would dream about the building, the way that I would have this sense of continuity is that I would always pass by an area or a room that I had previously dreamt about. And very often, even when I would find a new room that I knew I hadn't dreamt about, when I woke, during the time that I was having the dream, everywhere was extremely familiar. Every room, every hallway was very familiar to me. So the next dream that I remember having, and there was a period where I had a lot of dreams about this place in a very short amount of time. And they would be weekly, at least, sometimes multiple times a week. So the next one that I had was very interestingly related to another recurring dream that I had had since I was very young, which is I've read is a really common sort of dream to have as a child. I used to have this dream that I was running, and it was very dark, and I couldn't quite see where I was going, but I knew that there was someone chasing me. And that person was dressed in very, very dark clothing, or just very much concealed very well. And I would run and run and run from this person, and I would never get away. I would always just wake up in the middle of running. So I had this dream that was honestly a bit kind of comedic in the way it played out, but I was running through this building, the one that I had dreamt about before, and I ran from that main entranceway to what I remember being the left sort of wing of the building, and there were two escalators, very tall escalators, and I ran up the escalators, and there were two in this dream. There were two men chasing after me, in this clothing that very well concealed their faces and any kind of details about them. Besides that, I remember them being kind of slender. And they chased me up this escalator, and there was a large food court at the top of these escalators. This entire floor was like a food court. And there was a large kind of buffet sort of setup in the middle, with all kinds of food set out. And basically the dream played out like, some kind of goofy movie, like Home Alone or something, where I was jumping over the tables, and I was a bit too quick for the guys who were chasing me, and they fell over the food, and basically I evaded them, and then we set off some kind of alarm, and they tripped and fell over each other at one point. And for the first time, this dream where I was being chased actually ended, and it ended with them being arrested by like security. So that was the end of that dream. The next dream that I have a somewhat vivid memory about is a dream that I was back in the building, and I was taking a tour of a part of the building. And again, I knew it was the same place, not just in my head while I was dreaming, but because we passed by that entryway where you could see up into all these different floors and see all these rooms. But we also passed by that area with the escalators that led to that food court, which I found out was open almost 24 hours a day. Like most of the day it was open. And primarily the area in the middle where that sort of buffet kind of section was that I had remembered actually turned out to be this kind of like a food sort of, what do you call it, like a kitchen where like people could come and get food, and there would be food that was always free, like soup or whatnot, like a soup kitchen or a food pantry or something like that. So like primarily that area in the middle was for the homeless or people who just couldn't afford a meal that day, and there would be food that was free. So anyway, and I was being led through these different parts of the building. There was another room that we went into that had a pool, a very large pool. It was kind of like walking into that room of a YMCA. Except that in that room where the pool was, that room also stretched up like higher than I could really describe, and there were different levels and stairways and windows to different floors. So I had a few different dreams about touring this building, because the next one that I remember was very similar, except I, at one point, and I believe this is within about a year from that first dream where I was touring the building, I began having these dreams that I was leading tours through the building, and that I worked there. And I couldn't tell you what I did. My initial job, I had different jobs within the building after these ones, but initially I just dreamt that I was working there, I don't know, doing one thing or another. Maybe odd jobs, cleaning, I guess. it was something entry level, I know. And there was, again, another kind of strange one where I was giving people a tour of the area with all the pools that I mentioned a moment ago, and someone was running in one of the upper levels, and I stopped the tour in the middle to chase this person down, and I remember there was myself and a couple other people leading the tour, and we all dove into the pools after this person. And so there was this recurring theme at different points, different dreams, where somebody was in the building that not necessarily shouldn't have been there, but was doing something that was not allowed. So, like that first dream where I was being chased, I later found out that those men were trying to steal things from this building. So, after I had these dreams where I was leading these tours of the building, I started to have just a series of shorter dreams where I would just be walking around thinking about this or that, and I would pass by these different rooms. Sometimes I would go into the food court, and pretty often it would be after hours when everything was open, but it was kind of, there were less lights on, and it was just kind of, everybody had probably gone to sleep, was my thought in the dream. But you could still go to these different areas, and there were still, people in some areas, and then in other areas there was like areas that were, I'm sorry. In some areas there were other places where you could access things, you could access food that was like self-serve and that sort of deal in the cafeteria. And it would be at like a point when it was just between closing and reopening. Because like I said, it was open most of the day and the evening. So I had a number of just dreams where I was going through this area or another, and I remember I would pass by new hallways and pass by room after room after room after room after room, which that was it, kind of, one of the stranger things was that as much as I would, with almost every dream, pass by a new area, a lot of them were very much the same, in that there was so many rooms where different people lived or different things were going on. There were hallways. Some hallways didn't have that many rooms. They had big areas. There was a towards the like upper levels. As the older I got, kind of the higher up I would go, there were spaces for, you know, large meetings, conferences, concert areas. Towards the very top, there was like a sanctuary. Like there was a church, at least one, in the building that was very large. And I remember it because there was a very, very large, like, not neon, but like this lit cross that was up towards the top in the middle of the sanctuary. So up towards the ceiling, there was this big old cross with these kind of green lights around it, and they kind of had a neon look. And I remember at different points going into that room. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm gonna circle back to the area where people would eat. So there was that room, that large room, that was like a food court with the escalators and that kind of area in the middle where you would serve people. But there was another area that I remember being towards the middle of the entire structure, wherever that is. And it was an even larger area. And it was kind of, I almost want to say it was a bit like a shopping mall. But I don't remember there ever being these like distinct stores there. I just remember the idea that there were these different places where people could get clothes, but not like, oh yeah, I distinctly remember there being a Gap in there. More of just this vague storefront or something. You know, maybe it's a thrift store. There's a lot of, like, in my head, almost every time I would dream about this place, and it was more than a couple minutes that I could remember, there was this idea of like a lot of people living in this building. Even though like I would have quite a few dreams, in fact the majority of the dreams that I had in this building, I would pass by very few people. And I even, like, more often than not, I would not really pass by anybody. Besides those dreams that I had earlier when I was 17, 18, where I was leading these tours. Like, after that, there is one dream that I remember pretty vividly, and I think I had dreams like this a few other times, but I remember one where I was in that larger area where there was more this area, unlike the area that the escalators led to earlier in the dream, this area in the middle also had multiple levels. So there were like stairs, and there was kind of a middle area where a lot of people were sitting, but there were these other floors that you could walk up to, and they had places to eat and areas where people were sitting and talking. And most of this area was just people sitting and talking, and there were probably hundreds of people, if not thousands, which again was like, it wasn't extremely rare at that time when I had that dream about the building. But as I would dream about it more and more and more, there would be less and less people around. It became a more personal space, even though there was this idea still, you know, always in the back of my head that like a lot of people lived in this building. But like I said, I would dream about walking around in the evening when a lot of people were maybe in other parts of the building than I was, or they were in their homes that were in the upper levels, so on and so forth. So I remember this movie that came on, I believe, around 2000, 2001, called Waking Life. And there's a scene in that movie that is just a vignette of these two characters talking about reincarnation and dreaming, and the entire movie is about dreaming. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. But this concept that they mentioned, it was the first time I've ever heard of it, was that perhaps reincarnation was like a poetic representation of collective memory. So, and in this movie, the main character keeps overhearing these different conversations, and he doesn't know where some of the things in those conversations came from. And that's always been something, from when I watched that movie, that always made me think of that dream specifically, where I was in that room and there were just hundreds and hundreds of people talking and eating, and these conversations that seemed to not come from myself, but from somewhere. Anyway, after that dream is when I started more frequently to dream about walking around in the building later on in the day, towards the evening. And I think that's because at one point I would always dream that not only at this point in my life, this is when I was closer to my 20s and in my early 20s, I had a number of dreams that I was now also living in the building, and I was living on one of the upper floors. like the highest up. And when I was in my early 20s, for a long while, I considered the idea of going into ministry and becoming like a pastor or something like that. And so I would have these dreams that's what I was. And so I lived on the floor where that big sanctuary was that I talked about earlier. At least, again, the Christian sort of one. Like I said, there was a lot of meeting areas, a lot of conference areas, a lot of large rooms in the building. So, I mean, who knows? There could be temples, mosques, somewhere on other floors. Maybe on that same floor. I don't know. But my personal faith is in Christ, and so I was at one point kind of caretaking that area, and then I know at another point later on I was actually preaching, though I never dreamed about preaching. I never dreamed about working there on a Sunday or anything like that. I would have these dreams pretty often. I would wake up from my room in the building, and I remember had these kind of white walls. My bed was very simple. I had some things around in the room, but yeah, there wasn't much to it. Or if there was, it was hard to tell, because I would wake up and I would have like this green sort of light that I turned on so that I could get from my room to the hallway without tripping over anything, but I couldn't see a whole lot because I had all the other lights off. And in a sort of I don't want to bother anybody way, I would walk through the halls. And the halls would have these green lights, the bottom towards the floor. Again, kind of neon, but maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I don't know. And I would go from the hallway into that sanctuary, and I would just kind of hang out there and think, and I guess sometimes pray, and that's kind of, that led into another, I guess, period of the dreams where I was working there, usually just kind of walking around. I had another dream where I heard a noise, and I woke up and I went to the sanctuary, and there were strange men again trying to I don't know, steal something. And I tripped an alarm, and I had taken some kind of, I don't know, self-defense class or whatnot, which is weird a bit because I'm a very passive person. I don't know if I would really do that. Maybe if maybe I needed to take it because of kind of something to do with the job that I had there, but I sort of, I guess, disarmed these men who I don't remember having guns. I just remember that they attacked me. And I did some sort of hold on them, and they were arrested. So yeah, in that dream there were like security guards, and I remember having this vague memory towards the end of the dream that like it was in the news, and that they referred to me as some kind of pastor or something. And later on there was a period where I would have dreams that I was older in the building. In fact, frequently when I would have the dreams that I was like in ministry and I was working at these upper levels of the building, I would dream that I was older, and I would dream that I had a wife, maybe that I had a kid. I don't really remember ever seeing the kid, but I remember this like vague idea that I had a family. And you know, it's one of those things where like, I don't know if you've ever had dreams where like when you're having the dream, you feel like you have these different memories and like you've experienced all of these things. And then when you wake up, you remember that feeling and that idea that, oh, you know, I dreamt that I was married and I had kids or whatever. But now that I'm awake, I can't really remember specific details. I just know that's what I was going through in the dream. So, yeah, and for a long while I would have again, like an interesting continuity, because there was a period where I kind of dreamt about having, like, my wife looked the same with, like, every dream that I had where I was married. But I couldn't see her face. I know, like, that's the really weird thing. It's like, how do you know she was always the same if you never saw her face? And I just kind of knew. It just seemed like the same person. So, anyway, that was probably when I was in my very early 20s, 21, 22, something like that. And I actually did not dream about the building for at least a few years. And there were other locations that I dreamt multiple times about, which I won't get into because I'm sure, I don't know how long I've been talking, but it's probably been a while. So, I didn't dream about the building for at least a few years. And then when I officially moved from Ohio to North Dakota, there was a year, the first year I lived with a couple other friends, but the second year I lived alone. And I was going through kind of like a hard time. I'd never lived alone. I was about 25, and I was processing a lot of things, and randomly, I remember at one point I started having dreams occasionally, again, where I passed through certain parts of the building. And every one of these dreams was specifically, I was alone. And in these dreams also, the building was a lot more, honestly, kind of like a dead mall. A side note, I started watching Dan Bell's Dead Mall series probably about 5 years ago. And when I first saw it, that is the first thing it reminded me of, were these latter dreams I had that year, mostly that year, about the building, where I was again walking through the halls, and these ones, like, again, I know I was in the building because I was walking through different parts that I had been to before, but in these few dreams that I had about it, I didn't go through the sanctuary. I didn't have a room. I don't think. It was like the building was still there, but I hadn't lived there in a number of years, and I wasn't working there anymore, and I had come back. And what I kind of ended up doing, because at the time I was a bit more experienced with like lucid dreaming, so I used the building as like this platform where I could kind of interact with my dream self. And I just remember I had more than one dream where I walked around for what seemed like hours and just kind of processed and thought. And it was very much, I don't know, it was kind of like I was walking through a liminal space. While I was going through a liminal part of my life, I was transitioning to this idea of being truly on my own and making new friends and meeting new people and so on and so forth. And I remember there was an area, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. There was an area that I was walking through, which was like, it was lit very, very much like when somewhere is closed for the night and they have those lights that are on, so that if somebody comes and looks through the door, there's these lights on. You know what I mean? Like the lights that they always keep on, like the night lights or whatever you want to call them. And those were the only lights that were on. I was just walking around in this mostly empty area with nobody else there, except that once or twice I dreamt that I was like literally talking to myself, like another version of myself. So that was interesting. And there were these kind of gold-colored strips, I remember, at different ends of the area, kind of like if you were in a mall and that gold strip was the place where the mall walkers would go. And there were these kind of old-fashioned, 1970s-esque, like tiles, brown and whatnot. And again, very much like a mall, but this would be about 10 years ago that I had these dreams. And it would have been about 26. And I would have been about 20, 19, 20, 21 when I had the dreams that I was working in the building. And I was about 17, 18 when I had the dreams that I was just kind of exploring and finding new rooms to the building. And when I first started having those dreams,